Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Energy Frontiers. I am Justina Okechukwu. This show has been brought to you by African Energy Chamber. Let me walk you through some of the biggest energy news highlights, as well as commitments, resolutions, and deals signed as world leaders across politics, policies, and businesses gathered at the UN Climate Summit, or COP28, in the UAE. The president of the African Development Bank Group, Akinwumi Adesina, has issued a warning about the potential impact of a new EU carbon border tax on Africa's trade and industrialization. This tax, according to the AFDB president, could penalize key exports such as steel, cement, iron, aluminium, and fertilizers, preventing the continent's progress and causing a loss of up to $25 billion annually. In a historic move, African and global institutions, alongside the governments of Germany, France, and Japan, as well as some philanthropic organizations, have joined forces to commit a whopping $175 million to the Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa. This groundbreaking initial pledge is set to fast-track funding for climate-aligned infrastructure projects across the African continent. In the meantime, the world's multilateral development banks have pledged to step up their fight against climate change through increased funding, improved tracking of climate action, and supporting countries and private sector to accelerate a green and just transition. The Republic of Kenya has so far signed deals worth over $4.48 billion for several eco-friendly initiatives. These projects, ranging from geothermal power plants to sustainable fertilizer production and a cutting-edge data center powered by renewable energy, showcases Kenya's commitment to become a green powerhouse of Africa. Good news for Sierra Leone's energy sector after a major investment was announced for a new 50-megawatt solar power project. This project will be the first large-scale solar power plant in the country and will help to reduce reliance on fossil fuels, which currently generates 80% of Sierra Leone's electricity. In what has been termed a great first step for climate action, 50 oil and gas companies, including industry giants ExxonMobil, Shell, and British Petroleum, have signed a new global industry agreement, Oil and Gas Decarbonization Charter, that is aimed at eliminating routine gas flaring and reducing methane emissions to near zero by the year 2030. And that was a snapshot of your energy news headlines. Public and private sector organizations have continued to mobilize the investments to deliver on the Paris Agreement. We have more for you in this package. Welcome back. As the COP28 summit starts to wind down in Dubai, public and private sector organizations have continued to mobilize the investment needed to deliver on the Paris Agreement. In the first week of the global climate talks, parties came together and inspired actions, mobilizing over $83 billion in funding commitments and building the momentum needed to keep 1.5 degrees within reach. COP28 President Sultan Al Jaber appealed to countries to capitalize on these opportunities, raising the bar and maintaining momentum to drive ambitions towards the negotiated outcomes.
Allow me to say that you should all be very proud of this extraordinary achievement. I thank you all for your engagement and support. On top of that, in the first hour after gathering the decision, we began to capitalize the fund, and so far we have $726 million in pledges. And it is my promise that I will keep pushing for more. We catalyzed action across climate finance, nature, energy, and methane, as well as the first ever COP declarations on cooling, health, and food. And we have mobilized over $83 billion in commitments, pledges, and investments so far. On the global stocktake, we welcome the hard work of the Joint Contract Group. It has been a monumental task in a short period of time. I thank Alison and Joe for their leadership and massive effort. It's important that we shift gears and that we get all ministers and heads of delegations engaged on all the elements of the GST. Let's deliver the true course correction that the science tells us we need to keep 1.5 within reach. Adaptation is a key element of climate action. An outcome under the global goal on adaptation is essential to creating a pathway that makes a difference in protecting people, livelihoods, and ecosystems. The GGA must effectively capture those areas of work that will create a guiding star that builds resilience and reduces vulnerability. I will undertake consultations with ministers to determine the best way for the presidency to support parties to deliver a robust outcome for the GGA. I call on parties to also consider how we can make real progress to address the adaptation finance gap.
Africa would require $4 billion each year to finance clean cooking, and developed nations have been asked to scale up their funding to provide needed solutions to over 900 million households. The Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, Fatih Birol, and Damilola Ogunbiyi, the CEO of Sustainable Energy for All, joined the call for increased funding to accelerate the use of electric cooking in Africa.
The main issue for me is in Africa, because Kande, I am a man with making hands dirty with data. I look at many numbers, but there are not many numbers which makes me so sad when I look at them. Couple of numbers, very simple. According to our analysis, we just made a report, a clean cooking report, and you will see there's a lot of follow-up of that. But one number is 4 out of 5 families in Africa use primitive cook stoves, using wood, agricultural waste, animal waste for preparing the meal. This is the one number. The second number, a woman spends up to 4 hours per day to collect the wood and bring it back for cooking, robbing her time. Third, our work together with WHO says every year, look at this number, every year, 500,000 women die prematurely because of the respiratory diseases caused by primitive cooking. 500,000 means 500,000. It's incredible. And nobody, if I was, especially in Europe, everywhere, but in Europe, Europe is a neighbor of Africa. In my culture, in many of our cultures, if neighbor is in trouble, they help each other. I cannot believe that this is happening in front of our eyes. It is when we talk about the gender issues, in many countries, we say it is in the boardrooms, it is 48%, 52%. This is important and we should do it. But this is the biggest gender issue. I mean, if I was a woman, the feminine, they should demonstrate this is a real issue. 500,000 women die because of the because of the respiratory diseases as a result of premature death. And plus, as the Uganda minister told me yesterday when we were talking, many women in Africa carry their children on their back, and many children have lung diseases because of that. And yet, the most heartbreaking number, to solve this problem, we have calculated country by country, application by application, it requires $4 billion of money each year. $4 billion is nothing. This amount of money we pay in Europe in the coffee houses for coffee drinking in Europe, in 1 week coffee drinking in Europe. Okay? So this is, in my view, a biggest injustice. But the good thing is we can solve it. We can solve it easily because money is not a huge amount, and you don't need to discover huge new technologies. So what are we going to do? I can tell you, Kande, we cannot, as IEA, just sit back and wait and watch the situation, as we have done in terms of the net zero transformation and in terms of electricity access. We are next spring organizing an international conference in Paris for Africa. I have already the commitment of several heads of states.
I think what's clear, and thank you, Kande, and thank you for having me here today. I think what's clear is that we have a misconception of where our emissions are coming from. So I was shocked when we did the analysis of my own country, Nigeria, that it's not from the power sector, even though we have 45 gigawatts of diesel and petrol generation. It was actually from the cooking sector with the level of deforestation. So when we're talking about climate, I find it very strange that nobody links clean cooking to it. So if you didn't care about the people, which clearly what Fatih says, 500,000 people dying doesn't get you moving, then maybe you can care about the planet and say that if we don't tackle clean cooking, then we cannot tackle climate change. It's a development issue at the end of the day, and it's very firm. And just like Fatih, I was outraged, not to talk about the gender-based violence figures, the fact that the firstborn in many families doesn't get to go to school because they have to go and get the fuel wood. There are all these knock-on social effects of, literally living a life in poverty. And what we're trying to do with just the basics of clean cooking is getting people out of poverty. So I think, having this at this big stage, and I do have to thank my team and, Mikkel as well for making this happen. I think we need to just all make a pledge that it can never go back to being the stepchild of electrification. That clean cooking is just as important, if not more important, than electrification. The figures Fatih said, if 500,000 people were even dying at war, we know what we would do. Right. And this is happening every single year. And unfortunately, for me, coming from a global south and being an African woman, it's even more depressing because it's almost like the world saying, because they're dying over there, it's not as much as an issue as if they were dying in another part of the world. So there are all these different social aspects of it that we really need to think of ourselves as a society and say, if we're all right with it, how do we move forward? But I just want to talk about the innovation of what's going on as well, and put some good news on how things are working. We see a lot of technology innovation. Right now, just in my home country in Lagos, we're testing out all these electric cook stoves in markets with women who cook for a living. All that is working. Difna's doing an amazing job with the delivery units that she's embedding into governments to work on these issues. The Global Energy Alliance of People of Planet working together to make this the global electric cooking pledge and coalition, which we'll hear about later. And then, even the financing that's coming now is coming in from different people. I have some people in Kenya that is the tech companies that are paying, because if women are paying for services and you can meet to them, then you can offer them so many other services. So I don't want people to look at clean cooking as, I gave someone a stove, which is what people thinking you should be so happy you have this stove. I think they need to look at it as electrification. You keep on evolving from it, and it is buying women, unfortunately, it's women that suffer the most, time for them to be more productive in society, meaning there will be GDP growth and then the knock-on effects of that. So coming back to especially what we're doing in Sierra Leone is, what is the green growth story with clean cooking? How is clean cooking the green growth story for Sierra Leone? And it's a different way to look at it, because we've always looked at it as big infrastructure and big projects. Those have to be done. But if you really want to meet the most vulnerable people and make sure your people are healthy and out of poverty, you have to tackle this issue.
When we return, young Africans need financing to drive green projects, and the Tony Elumelu Foundation is bridging that gap. Stay with us. This is Energy Frontiers. At a series of sideline events across the COP28 meetings, the group chairman of UBA Group and founder of the Tony Elumelu Foundation, Tony Elumelu, sat down with the Director General of the World Trade Organization, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, at the high-level roundtable session to discuss innovative approaches to climate adaptation and financing youth-led green businesses on the continent.
And I wanted to ask you, Tony, do you have some kind of database of at least your group and those who are green? Because I think we need one. And the reason I'm saying this is because to go green and to empower young people in this space, we need partnerships. Sure. If we don't have the power of a collective, it will be difficult to form those partnerships. So I'm very, very interested. I don't want to duplicate what someone else has done. So I'm saying it openly. If anyone knows of where there is a database of all our young people, young entrepreneurs in green, please put up your hand. Because if there isn't, I'd like to see how we can develop one. And we're interested in young people. We just had an event on youth and trade. We had one on gender and trade. And what do we like to do? We like to build knowledge platforms that young entrepreneurs can tap into and women entrepreneurs can tap into. We have some ability to do some capacity building to help young entrepreneurs. And above all, we have it's not a magic bullet, but I like to think of it sometimes. We have the International Trade Center. The International Trade Center is an offshoot of the WTO and the UNCTAD. And I wished I could have come with Pamela Cook-Hamilton, who is the CEO of that, because they do supply side interventions, meaning they actually try to help with finance, with knowledge, with capacity building, with all the things that frustrate. And they are working in the green space. So the ways we can work with you is by working with you through the ITC. So, and also directly with the WTO itself. But as I said, through building knowledge together, helping to build your capacity. We are also trying to work with bigger enterprises and who have supply chains. Because you have young entrepreneurs who could be part of these supply chains, already are. And what we are trying to say to them is, there is opportunity in Africa.
I think you asked me a question. So the Tony Elumelu Foundation and iCare Foundation and Generation U, UNICEF Generation U, have come together, and currently we are supporting 200 young African entrepreneurs in green economy in Kenya. It's an experiment we're making now to see how that works, and then we should be able to catalyze it across the continent. But on the issue of data specifically, yes, we have data, those we have funded, the out of the 18,700 we have funded, we have data of those who are in that green space. But I take up the challenge. We need to do even beyond what we do and see how we can help create that database for the continent where people who are in that space can register and begin to know what we have available on the continent.
And that's the package of Energy Frontiers at this time. And we thank you all for watching. Be sure to follow the program on Frontier Africa Reports website, like this video and subscribe to our YouTube. Follow us across all our social media handles as indicated on the screen. I am Justina Okechukwu. I'll see you next time.